Good afternoon, and welcome to Ask the Experts. I'm Samantha Pullum, a Media Relations Specialist at Ohio University, and your moderator for today's conversation. Today, I'm talking with College of Fine Arts experts Brent Frederick, Assistant Professor of Instruction in Musical Theater and Music Director for the Musical Theater Program, as well as Music Director for Natasha, Piere, and the Great Comet of 1812, as well as Alan Patrick Kenny, Assistant Professor, Head of the Musical Theater Program, and the Director of Great Comet, as well as College of Arts and Sciences expert Marilyn Atlas, Professor of English. And today we are talking all about bringing this incredible electropop opera that is actually created by an Ohio University alum, Dave Malloy, to Ohio University and Tantrum Theater stage. So welcome to the three of you, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to virtually sit down and talk with me today about this musical that's not only heading into its closing weekend, right, but is also written by an alum, which is just an incredible thing to be able to put on our stage. So before we get started, if each of you could just talk a little bit about yourself, your expertise in the field, your relationship to Great Comet, that'd be really great. Brent, how about we start with you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Brent Frederick. I'm the music director for this show, and I'm so excited after 2 years of talking about it to have finally put it on the stage for everyone here. I have a long relationship with Great Comet. I worked in the Broadway production. I was a rehearsal pianist there, so I've seen it in its original, well, not its original incarnation. I was involved in the tent and some of the pre-Broadway productions, but I've been with it for a couple of years at this point. This is my second year at Ohio, so I've come on in what was the second year of our new BFA in musical theater program. So enjoying making this all happen for the community.
Great. Thank you. And welcome to Ohio. You know, you said 2 years, but still, we've been transitioning back from COVID. So I'm glad that we can have you here and especially on today. So thank you. Alan, how about we go to you for an introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having us and for giving us this time to chat about what we love, which is musical theater and the future of musical theater, which I think if you were to encapsulate one show that's moving the art form forward right now, it's Great Comet. And so we're thrilled to be able to do it. In terms of my background, I started off as a musical theater major myself at NYU, quickly turned to directing and started a theater company in Cincinnati when I was 20, ran it for 7 years. I have two parallel careers. I'm a director, and then I'm also a music director and a pianist. So I've spent years around floating around the world, just like Dave Malloy did on cruise ships, and music directing national tours and regional theaters and directing. I have an MFA in directing for theater from the UCLA, and then I taught for 6 years, was associate professor and head of musical theater at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point before coming here in 2018 to rewrite musical theater curricula for a new generation. And so it's been a wonderful 4-year journey here. And since I got here in 2018, when I found out Dave was an alum, I was like, that has to be our first show. That has to be the thing that we put on stage. And everyone thought I was insane because it's a big one and because it's a super challenging show. But I'm really thrilled that we finally, after many pandemic and other delays, that we've been able to bring his voice and his unique storytelling to the stage here.
Thank you. And I'm so glad you were able to. For our viewers, I actually was able to see Great Comet last night, and wow, you know, you truly did it justice, and it's a wonderful piece of art that, you know, like you said, is definitely a challenge, but you guys overcame that challenge and truly brought something amazing to this community. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, and certainly last but not least by any means, Marilyn, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I think with these people I am least. I love the production too. I just wanted to mirror what Sam was saying, and I'm a professor at Ohio University in the English department, and I like to study experimental art and also influence. I'm a Chicago Renaissance person. I deal with the local and the global, the micro and the macro, modernism, postmodernism. And I'm so interested in translation both in terms of language and also in terms of form. You know, how do you move something from novel to musical? And I think you guys did a beautiful job. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. And I'm really glad that we can have you on this conversation as well, because, with Brent and Alan, we really get your perspective from the process of putting it onto the stage. But, that page portion of it, the adaptation, Marilyn, I think you're going to really give great insight to our viewers on adapting, this huge novel of Tolstoy's into this musical. So thank you so much for all of you to being here and having this conversation. For our viewers, if you have any questions for our experts, please drop those questions in the comments section of the live stream, or feel free to direct message your questions to the Ohio University social media channels. We will do our absolute best to get to as many of your questions today as possible. And if we don't, please feel free to still send them our way, and we can see if we can answer them by giving them to our experts to respond to at another time. So without further ado, I say let's get this conversation started. So for those of you who don't know, Natasha, Piere, and the Great Comet of 1812 is based off of a slice of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. So Marilyn, can you kind of, put us in this place and explain how the Great Comet fits into Tolstoy's larger novel?
Sure. I have a prop. This is the novel. David Malloy had to put this into a musical. And what he chose to do, there's 5 books. He chose to take a certain section, which is the end of section 2. And in the Oxford edition, which is the Maud edition, 1922, just for those of you who want to take a look at it, it's page 571 to 641. So we've got about a 70-page slice. And this novel's very hybrid. It's filled with philosophy. It's filled with history, with war. We've got a narrator who weaves in and out, but this particular portion is very dramatic. And it was just so interesting the way David and then Alan put it together for different types of audiences. I'm not sure if that answers your question totally. One of the things about this is there's various translations. It was first serialized in Russian, and then it was a novel in 1869. So we've got the era of American transcendentalism, of Romanticism in Europe. Russia is extremely affected by Europe. That 10% of the novel is in French. And the elite don't always know Russian, even though they're in Russia. And there's all the St. Petersburg versus Moscow business going on. So we've got various translations. The first one's 1886. That's kind of the Chicago Renaissance time. New York is losing power. The Midwest is gaining power. We have Connie Garnett, who was able to translate it. Not everyone loved her translation. And then the Mauds came, and they were great translators, but they may not have known, they were better at language, but not necessarily better at Russian culture. Mm-hmm. So every version is different, just like every version of the musical is different. So that's kind of a little bit of a background of the novel and how art's done. You have to learn Russian, basically, I think. I think that's our next step.
Great, thank you. And so, kind of going off of that for you, Alan and Brent, can you talk a little bit about, the influences from the novel that you brought into this stage production, whether it was the Russian culture, whether it was, often Tolstoy will break, I know, Marilyn, you talked about last night at the talkback, break that fourth wall and talk in third person. Can you talk kind of how you translated that to the stage?
Sure. Well, I'm going to toss that to Brent just because I think my original experience of the show was I had not previously read War and Peace. I was not a War and Peace person. I was not a Tolstoy person. I wandered into the tent at 45th Street to see what I heard was a really cool musical, and had a very visceral theatrical experience in a 200-seat bespoke tent with walkways everywhere and actors playing playing instruments and people sitting down next to actors while the audience was at banquets and doing and doing this really original kind of piece of theater. And so my first response was to the music. And I think, yes, it's a musical that was on Broadway, but Dave describes it as an electro pop opera. And so my experience with it and the way into the piece was very much through the music. Brent, do you want to talk about sort of that side of it first?
Yeah, I think Dave took a brilliant approach in crafting the piece because the novel is so dense. And I'll let you all talk about how he adapted some characters and really made this slice accessible. But you look at the first number in the show, the prologue, he framed the piece for everyone. So there's a lyric in there. It's a complicated Russian novel. Everyone's got 9 different names. So look it up in your program. We'd appreciate it. Thanks a lot. And we've done it here where we've sketched out Pierre's family tree, so you can see how all of these characters are intersecting. And David took a moment for them all to introduce each other and let you see these relationships so that the piece can exist without a reference look up through the entire musical. But it's just so eclectic. Like, yes, Dave calls it electropop opera. So it's an opera, but it's an opera where he really married the modern sounds with traditional Russian sounds. So whereas we are jumping back in and out of narration, which you mentioned, the characters a lot of times are singing a line in character and then direct address to the audience to narrate the plot, he is using those devices, and he's using devices such as techno music and dance floor sounds to bring us into the world where these characters are, to the point that when characters are having a breakdown later in the show, he's chosen to make that a techno breakdown. You're hearing the music disintegrate the same way that their emotional states are disintegrating. So the use of music is really smart. It's really brilliant. He used actor musicians. The piece was originally an actor-musician piece with actors covering all of the instruments that you're hearing in this tiny space called Ars Nova that originally developed the piece. And as it grew and grew and grew, we added what you saw in our production, a seated orchestra, but a lot of actor-musicians, and just finding a way that they can tell story while playing and moving the plot forward all the time. I feel like I rambled, but did I get at what you were talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the things as a director, I look at the text, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's in an opera, there's musical text, and then there's spoken dialogue text, and then there's stage directions, and then we have to create a physical world to bring that to life, right? And literally from page to stage. And to put on my musical theater history professor hat for a second, the adaptation is really interesting and it really is divergent from how most musicals are developed. So musical theater are primarily, if you were to look at a percentage, probably 90% of successful musicals are adapted from another source, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not original stories. And there's a very specific reason for that. Something like a play or a movie, unfortunately too many movies in my opinion, novellas, short stories, comic books, these ideas, they have bones in terms of the storytelling structure. They have a spine, they have some type of Aristotelian plot structure, hopefully, that then we can the musical adapters, because it's musicals are usually written by committee, right? Instead of one playwright, you have a composer, and sometimes that person also writes the lyrics, and sometimes then there's an orchestrator, and then there's a book writer. And then there's the director who's usually shaping it. So that's like a lot of people, a lot of voices, choreographer coming in, right? Dave basically did everything except for direct and choreograph the piece. He starred as Piere. He was the original music director. He wrote the book. He wrote the lyrics. He wrote the orchestration. He even did the keyboard programming and the electronic tracks himself. Amazing. But what's also strange about it, and strange in a good way, is that usually when novels, full-length novels, are adapted into a musical, the impulse is to, well, it has name recognition, and we try to put this whole epic story, however long the book is, on the stage. And so you get things like Showboat, Mame, Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis, and they put the whole darn tome on stage, and in my opinion, to varying degrees of success. right? In terms of like how much can you cram in a 2.5 hour to 3 hour musical event? And then you look at something like War and Peace, 1,400 pages, generations. It's not really possible, right? And so it's amazing to me that he's like, yeah, we're just going to do a portion of it and forego the name recognition of War and Peace, which probably turned out to be a good thing because I think people are scared of that kind of book, right? The size, the commitment of reading it, but also that we're going to actually put the book on stage. Which, if you look at interviews from Dave and Rachel Chavkin, the original director, that was the impulse. So the lyrics don't rhyme, with a few exceptions. Very strange for a musical. The style is incredibly diverse musically. Very strange for an opera, and there's a lot of narration and director address, which doesn't almost ever happen in a musical, and a narrative musical to be sure. So those things are all are like outliers from how most musicals are done, and require the director and the choreographer and the design team to really figure out, okay, how can we create an environment, a world in a physical space that allows those things to exist. And that was really the wonderful challenge to bringing the piece to life.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And, as someone who, I'm not going to lie, I've never read War and Peace because I look at the book and it scares me. I'm like, do I have time for that? Am I going to be put to sleep halfway through it? So it's nice to, like you said, they didn't call it, War and Peace and something. It was a whole new meaning, but putting that sliver of a portion of it on the stage, after seeing it myself, now I want to go read it because I'm curious about it. It didn't frighten me away from the book. It's made me more eager to read it, just because they told a small story within this huge, novel that was interesting, and you could see those relationships, Brent, like you talked about. And that opening number, it did, for someone who's never read it, set the stage for me to know how these relationships are currently working, how they were formed, how are we going to see it, grow throughout the show. And I think it was a great idea adapting just a sliver of it, because it would have been a 7-hour show with 3 intermissions without it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you all for that. And I actually want to go back to something, Brent, that you had brought up. So you have actor musicians on the stage, which, I think, we've seen sometimes with Once, as well as the show. And I feel like it's kind of starting to, I don't know if I want to say become bigger, but I think you are seeing actors starting to train as musicians, or musicians starting to train as actors, to be able to kind of fill some of these roles. How do you train an actor to, I was watching the clarinet player, just mind-blowing how, they were being able to do the choreography while playing, while acting with their face the entire time. How do you train actors to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, which I'm glad you asked, because we have some remarkable actor musicians here. And I'll tout the program here for a moment, because we have the first of its kind actor musicianship certificate that we offer as part of an add-on to our curriculum here. So, and there's no easy answer to that. We have a spirit involving an expletive, saying when you're trying actor musicianship, throw something at the wall. It doesn't matter if you make the right sounds. Musicianship can be so rigid. If you think of a conservatory system and how you worry about making sure every note is exactly right, and the technique and the breathing and all of the elements that go into being a trained musician. I took piano lessons since I was 7 years old, so I come out of that world too. But here we're marrying the interest in storytelling with an instrument, and there's a lot of different ways to do this. So you mentioned Once. That's the show that everybody, I think, thinks of first for these, because it was so well executed. And then you have directors like John Doyle coming out of England, who are also doing this all the time with Sweeney Todd and Company on Broadway, and the recent revival of Assassins off Broadway, where actor musicianship is woven into the fabric of the piece with no conductor at all. So this piece started in that vein and evolved into a more traditional orchestra with augmentation from actor musicians. And I can't speak to exactly why that happened, other than the intent that the piece had to get bigger to move to Broadway. And I think you mentioned that it's a small story. So the actor musicians are part of telling this small story. If you saw in our production, they are staged and reacting to everything going on around them. When there is tension, you'll see accordions all over the place playing dissonant chords that Dave is just a master of pulling in harmonic eclecticism, so you have something that sounds super predictable, but oh, wait, what is this? What is this dissonant tone that's coming in? What is that conveying? And he has gone further into putting those people onto the stage so you can see them react with their faces and react with their bodies and tell that story. So it's something that's very hard to teach because we work with whatever people bring to the table. That's really what it takes. You have to be competent enough on a musical instrument to be able to also layer in the acting and tell a story, but do it in a way that none of those particular areas suffer. And I will just offer that I'm so impressed with what our students did. Everyone you saw up there is a student, including in our orchestra. So our accordion player, who was all over the place, Sebastian Yobe Bowen, remarkable. He's playing an accordion book that was designed for a real seated accordion player. And he's just has it internal to the point that he can walk around with that instrument and act and be part of the play space. So in terms of teaching it, when we see an opportunity to pull that in, we always want to do that. We want to have that experiential kind of learning for the students and also just to augment the piece because it's a small piece, but it can be overwhelming. So just how we've adapted it to this space is very different. There were more roving musicians in New York, just for a scale of, they had more square footage to fill too. So here we're able to use them also as a storytelling of incorporating the in the round staging that we originally wanted to do with this before COVID has forced us into 2 years of redesigns for the production. So rather than being truly immersive, we're sort of in a 3/4 thrust with the orchestra upstage and bringing people down and into the action. But I think they're integral to the storytelling.
Yeah, most definitely. And just incredibly impressive. And the fact that it is students, these are not people who've had years of work and practice in the industry. These are students who are learning, who are being trained in this. And it is impressive. I said my knees just hurt watching all of them do the choreography, let alone those who were having the accordions, carrying them around playing. It is just impressive.
Just to add on to that point and to clarify, we do have one guest artist who's incredible, okay. David Rowan, who played Piere, who also plays accordion and piano during the show. He's a New York-based musician. He's amazing. But we have 8 students who are actor musicians as part of the show, alongside David, and really impressive stuff. Something that's interesting about that, I was the one who sort of spearheaded the creation of that program, the actor musicianship certificate. And the reason that I wanted to do it, well, I've done actor musicianship work myself, but also I love these shows that are happening. And actor musicianship is a long history. It started really in earnest in the 80s in London, and it's very popular throughout Great Britain, to the point where you can actually get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree as an actor musician in the UK. And there's a real history of it, of trying to do big musicals in small spaces that can't have an orchestra. That's sort of one way that it happens. Another way is like Beatlemania and these other things where they would sort of pastiche a band that already previously existed. But then there's these innovators like John Doyle. I would add John Tiffany to the list, Stephen Hoggett, the choreographer, Richard Oberacker, who wrote Bandstand, which is another sort of way that this has become fully integrated. And the big problem in talking to these people is that they don't have enough people who know how to do it, who know how to play at a world-class level and also can do all of these things. And so that was part of the reason why we created the certificate, is so these musical theater or acting majors or music majors get access to other classes that they're missing in order to learn how to be expressive with their characters and their bodies and their acting ideas while playing. And it was important to me that we feature actor musicianship as part of what we do. I also think it ties really interesting to Tolstoy and Dave's original impulse. So the reason that the original production was immersive, set in a Russian club, is because he went to a club in Russia and had an experience, and this underground sort of club, and the instrumentalists were all spread out throughout the room. So he sat like right next to a viola player, and then the other instruments were across the room. And so he had orally a very interesting experience with the sort of celebration. And if you were to ask somebody what War and Peace is about, you can't really get an answer besides it's about life. It's so big. There's so many themes. It's about life. And I think it's about community and relationships. And so to give an actor a clarinet, or to give an actor a guitar or an accordion, helps to identify them in the ensemble as a unique person with a unique perspective and point of view and character. And that's something that we're really interested in, is not just having a blob of people as an ensemble, which is, I think, how it used to be in a lot of ways, especially before West Side Story, when nobody even had character names, right? The idea is that everyone has a unique point of view and perspective, and then we see a diverse, unique gathering of people. And instruments help to do that in Dave's version. Vocal styles, right? There's a lot of non-traditional non-Broadway styles of singing that happen. Each character, there's one that sort of sings like Beyonce. There's one that sort of sings like David Bowie. And all of this diversity helps to put the world on stage, as opposed to put an indistinct group of people on stage.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And, after watching it last night, I completely understand what you're saying, because you're right. My eye was, not focusing on the ensemble as a whole either, because it was people, standing there singing, but my eye was being drawn to each individual ensemble member who, whether they had an instrument or not, because they had a really specific role that they were playing. And then kind of the way you described the music, I love that. 1 second, you're right, we're standing there with like an R&B sound almost, and then going to a literal like boom, 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 kind of club scene, and the differing music, really kept you on your feet to know what was happening. But what you spoke of too is kind of what War and Peace was about life. And so, we've been talking a little bit so far about this particular slice of it and how it's, about the relationships. But Marilyn, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the similarities and the differences that you found within Great Comet to the, section of this part in the book, as well as the rest of the book. I know the book, is kind of goes over generations and is a while, but what are the similarities and differences that you kind of saw in the adaptation?
As Ellen and Brent talk about the production of the musical, the electro pop opera, and the individual musical pieces, and the dancers and the talent, I think that's in the book. It's just through language. As the visuals you do. The interest in the micro, and history really being best told through individuals, is partially, I think, what this book is about, and how Tolstoy defended the novel. One of the things you asked earlier was about themes. And this section, I think, particularly captures that movement from outer family to inner self. I don't know if you know the artist Bruegel, but there's these great dance scenes, Russian dance scenes, and it looks so festive. But when you look at the individual faces, you see a hard life. Mm-hmm. You see torture. Piere is the epitome of someone who's both outward and inward. He's a reader. He's a scholar. He's plagued with desperation, but he's friends to everybody with an open wallet. He's extremely rich, and he's very confused, and he wants more. And that's why he's attracted to this young girl she wants more. She deserves the prince, so to speak, if the prince were the prince, which they never are. Not in that absolute ideal good way. He's a person with stuff. And he's a mess, and this is his second marriage, and he's a little bit older, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think that what we've got here, don't be afraid of the novel. Don't be afraid of language. It's a different translation. You've got the rhythm. You've got the repetition. You've got the sound. You've got the lights. I mean, that's what the Comet's all about. The light that can change you. You have the philosophy and the science. You've got dualism being kind of taken apart. So it's all there in a different form. And I think that's so important to know. And also to remember, these characters come from a book. And for them to be played properly, whatever the vision is, you can get stuff from the original. You don't want to lose that. That's what David Malloy did. He was obviously really interested in Natasha and in Andre and in the prince and in Mary and in Maria. He cared about these people and about how to survive this earth, this world, when everything's in flux, so corrupt, where things come and bite you, where you go to Europe, as did Tolstoy, to get educated, and all the things you bring home undermine who you are as opposed to building and expanding it. It's all here. It's in language, but it's not only here. It's also on the stage. I think that's the magic of translation into different forms. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that was great. You definitely did. And it was nice. You provided some context to, the story that is being told on the stage right now, as well as partially the book. So, thank you so much. We actually have a question from one of our reviewers right now. I guess kind of a spoiler alert to those who have not seen it. This is a fun portion of it. Not terribly big, I promise. But Cynthia is asking, was the DJ with the lighted colored headphones and mixing board part of the New York production too? And kind of going off of their question as well, can you talk about the differences, Brent, when you worked on the New York production versus this production? But that is, like I said, those who haven't seen it, keep your eye out if you do go see it for that.
Yeah, I can't remember if we had a DJ table or not, but in that section, the conductor stood up and was very much part of the action. I'm a little more hidden here where I'm upstage left. But yeah, in the New York production, the entire Imperial Theater was transformed. There was velvet over all the walls, portraits. They redid the lobby. It looked like a Soviet-era bomb shelter coming in there. And the chandeliers were removed. The audience was seated on the stage, and then there were pits in the ground where there were actor-musicians. There were ramps that ran up into the balconies so that actors could run up and down and truly use the whole space. And it was groundbreaking, and it was eclectic, and it was utterly beautiful and stunning. And having been involved in both productions, what I will say is, it's a very different experience to see it here, because it took me a lot longer in New York to really focus on the kernel of what this story is, this small piece of War and Peace. And it was just everywhere. So you were so much immersed in spectacle, and, we gave away pierogies and all of this good stuff during the show. But it was hard for me to find the duality, the moments that Piere is really struggling with, even though he was centered right there in the middle of the action. So, we leaned into those style shifts when it went into the club scenes. But here, I feel like we're more in the club at that moment, just because of it's a small piece, and the piece was developed in small spaces. So, there's no pro or con to any version of the storytelling, the way it was designed. It was remarkable in every iteration I've seen. But that was just something we leaned into. The opera was very different there. because this is kind of an opera, it's a musical, but there's a moment where we go to the opera in the middle and you see Dave utilize compositional tools that are not heard in musical theater, microtonal singing, very grotesque sounds. Natasha sings grotesque and amazing at this. She's going to the opera for the first time, seeing what this is, and it's extremely avant-garde. It's not something that you would normally expect to see in a Broadway musical. We did a little different research on that, and Alan could talk about what that was based on for us here dramaturgically. But I don't remember a DJ, but
there wasn't specifically a DJ, although I have a very visceral memory of the tent production where the music director pulled out a MacBook back when the Apple used to light up, and he opened that up, and I believe he put on like Beats headphones and became the DJ. And that was really it. Basically what's really kind of fun about a musical when it's well constructed is there's these sort of tentpole events that happen throughout the piece, especially like when the ensemble comes back in. And I think Brent's right in that something to note is most of the scenes are between 2 and 3 people. And for me, my visceral experience that I had in the tent, I had a different kind of experience when I saw it on Broadway, but I'm not sure that I always felt that intensity of the connection between the characters. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we tried to do was really figure out our version of the big tentpole moments, right? Which I do think the approach is somewhat different in some of these big scenes, and the club is one, the opera is another. But then also we tried to turn limitations into lemonade. One of the big challenges for us, the original design 2 years ago when we just got the rights and then COVID happened and we thought, oh yeah, that'll be over in 3 weeks, is that we had designed an immersive production that had an alternative entrance to the space, and it was in the round and things were everywhere. Because I was sort of trying to follow the initial inspiration while we also had a concept of that this was an abandoned theater that had been taken over by the players. And then after a year of postponement, the Actors' Equity rules that successfully brought back Broadway last fall required that all equity members be more than 6 feet away from any audience members. And so immediately that the immersive and in the round and the people in the aisles and the people next to audience members had to go. And so one of the things that we focused on in our redesign was like, well, what do we do instead? Mm-hmm. Right? If we're taking away immersion, because the alternative was not to do the show, and I needed to do the show, and I think we all needed to do the show and tell this story and bring Dave's work to the stage, no matter what. And when you really look at it, the immersive stuff was a lovely part of the original conception, but not textually required, right? So instead, what we focused on was a community making music together in a room. And if you would have asked me 2 years ago if that was interesting, I would have said no, because that's what happens all the time. And now that's become a luxury in our society. So it's really a moment for us for now. So everyone's in the club. We have all the ensemble wearing modern dress, like they're actually at an influencer club right now. And yes, we have a percussionist, actor, musician character that we created for our production who puts on cat headphones and has a DJ table. And part of that is because that's what the music told us to do. Mm-hmm. Right? Like all of these choices that we did in order to bring our version to life come from the music and the text. And there's a track that goes, and that's a perfect time for him to spin a DJ table, but also what is, I think, the great pleasure of directing a show like this, where the set has, virtually no furniture. It's just a bunch of platforms at various levels. Is that every choice that we do of what we choose to bring on the stage as a prop or as a costume tells the story and furthers that story. So by a character bringing on a big bottle of Grey Goose and there being a cat headphoned DJ and strobe lights, we immediately know where we are. And I can use that shorthand with an audience to help further specify the moment. And then, of course, the brilliant choreography by our guest artist, Eden Hildebrand, helped bring that fully to life.
Yeah, and, having you explain how you originally had envisioned it, being that immersive, I can honestly say I would have never guessed that it was going to be more immersive, because sitting there in the audience, I was maybe 4 rows back from the stage, it felt immersive to me. You know, I felt like I was in the club. I almost wanted to join them dancing. You know, it was an immersive experience to me still. And so to think about how those renderings for it beforehand could have made it even more, it's just fascinating to me, because I think it still came across really well.
Well, thanks.
As an immersive experience.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, what we focused on instead was really going back to the original impulse of putting the book on stage and telling the story of the characters. And because our Forum Theater is only 6 rows deep at its deepest point, the theater space that we are in demanded a different production. Covet demanded a different production. My cast of 29 people demanded a different production. And what, you know, as a director, Rachel Chavkin won a Tony for this. The scenic designer won a MacArthur Genius Grant for this. I don't want to duplicate their work. Their work stands on its own. The only reason that I direct a show is when I can bring something to it. And the only reason that I think I really actually gravitated towards this is because Dave brought something to War and Peace that was unique, right? I've sat through plenty of plays where it's like, oh yeah, let's put Pride and Prejudice on stage, and there's nothing new. But there's something about this show and the incredible additional voice and content of Dave that inspired me to then say, okay, now let me reinterpret that for us at Tantrum Theater at Ohio University with this group of students, this guest artist actor for this audience in March of 2022. And if I'm doing that, then I feel like I'm doing my job, right? Otherwise, I'm copying, and I don't want to do that.
That's the whole point of being an artist, to do your vision and be able to bring your art to the stage. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So, you know, you talked about it being a 2-year delay because of COVID. Can you all, you know, talk about how that changed the rest of it? You know, clearly that changed the set design of it and the immersive experience that you originally wanted, but what else changed because, you know, you originally were meant to start putting this up 2 years ago?
Brent, do you want to start? Because you started first. As always in a musical or an opera, you learn the music first, and that's been pretty hard.
Yeah, you learn the music first. And I guess my own level of trust and certainty in everyone's process just had to be rediscovered through doing this. We all have done theater for so long, and this is a complicated piece. Coming here from clearly having institutional memory of the property, thinking, wow, this is going to be ambitious to do with students. How are we going to approach it? I just go, okay, and then figure it out. And you do all your prep, and we come into the room and teach the music. We had an entire week of music, and normally with a process like this, you go through that first week of music, and then the cast gets on their feet with choreography and blocking and staging, and usually they forget a good portion of what you've done. Even in the professional world, that happens, and then you need to go back and revisit it. But the timelines here were so tight that we really had no room for error in that schedule, or no room for reteaching. And I think the hunger to create art is what impressed me the most from everyone involved with this production. The student artists that you're seeing did remarkable work. They went through that first week of rehearsal, learned this complicated, crunchy harmony that's really just out there and not something that necessarily sticks in your ear the first time you hear it. And they maintained it. They came back, and we were able to continually build on that work, because theater is additive. We're always just putting elements on, and then the best theater figures out how to marry all of these disparate elements together. The music informs the choreography, informs the staging, and we were able to do that. So for me, it was a massive relief after 2 years of questioning why we were even doing this anymore, whether it was responsible to be pushing people into this field that was essentially shuttered because society deemed that there was no way to make this happen and it wasn't important. And I think that hurt everyone, especially as a new program here. We're getting on our feet, and our students were excited, but most of them haven't been in a stage since they were in high school. Some of them were in our film adaptation of Spring Awakening last year, and some of them have done plays here. But this musical would be a scale of something they were unlikely to have done before, let alone to have even done one in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
So we all just rediscovered this process together and trust in the process. And it was a balm, at least for my soul, to do that again. Because I started here in the pandemic. Okay, professor of musical theater, fun. And here you are, you're going to teach everything online and we're going to do Zoom. And I'm like, what are we doing? And we evolved. We pushed boundaries. We figured that out. And the students were part of that. Alan was part of that. Our entire School of Theater and Tantrum were part of that. But this was reconnecting with why we all did it in the first place. And it was granular and visceral, and people were able to dive into their musicality and their dance training and their acting and just do the thing and feel like, okay, we chose to do this for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd add, at least being up front, Brent has to make the show happen every night. Being out front, it was completely terrifying and also exhilarating. As Sondheim says, excited and scared. I was all of those things to the nth degree. And the challenges of doing this right now and starting rehearsal in the Omicron surge was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The equity protocols, the actors' equity, the union are much higher than what the university was at this semester. So we're testing 3 times a week. I didn't see the actors' mouths more than 3 times doing a show until there was an audience. And so there's a level of trust about, like, are you actually acting this, right? It affects the sound design in tech because of exposures. We were all masked. Mm-hmm. I didn't get to see their masks. The sound department, couldn't hear what they were actually going to do, and that was unbelievably challenging. The amazing work by our COVID safety manager and all of her assistants in just keeping us safe. When singing 2 years ago was a super spreader event that was life threatening to be in the room and doing. That's our livelihood. That's how we express ourselves. So yes, it was thrilling to have in the room. It was also one of the most challenging processes of my career, especially in academia. One of the unique things, because I was terrified about us not making it to the stage or having to cancel performances, knock wood, we have 2 left, is everybody has an understudy, including small roles. Anyone who has a sung role or a dance feature has an understudy. And I've never done it to this extent, but watching Broadway almost collapse in December and January, and the only reason that some shows survived was because of swings and understudies carrying the baton. We did the same. So every night at 10:30 or so, the understudies would run the material that I just staged with the principal cast. And they had, everyone has been doing that to the point where all the principals are covering their understudy track. And we're actually doing a closed performance for friends and family for the understudy, so they get a chance to perform the role. So it's not like the people that you saw just had to memorize all of that stuff and memorize their accordion parts. Oh no, Sebastian, who's an accordion player, is also an understudy to Bolkonsky and Andre. I mean, it's nuts. But the amount of learning that was able to happen because of it, and the fact that we could safeguard this really important show for us and try as best as we can to make sure that we could get it on stage was a feat, and every single person worked overtime to make it happen.
Wow, that's all I can say is just wow. And as a performer myself, I understand even just partially of how much the work that goes into it. But to do it on that scale and to do it amid everything going on with COVID and the protocols, you're right. I mean, it is adding to the intensity of what the work already is. And the amount, I don't know, if people realize the amount that not seeing from here to here can really do when it comes to theater and acting and music. I mean, people, as myself who've sung through the pandemic with a mask on, you need to be able to open your mouth to hit some notes, and your mask is going everywhere. You're eating it, depending, that affects the sound, like you said. The acting, there's so much told from here on down when you're acting that you're right. If you can't see as a director until, you have an audience, that's difficult, let alone everything else that brought about a challenge because of COVID. So just, complete applauding the whole cast creative team who has worked 2 years, not just the last few months, but the 2 years through this.
I think we should thank, I'm sorry to interrupt, I think we should thank our producers too through Tantrum, Michael Lincoln and Joshua Coy, and President Sherman and Gillian Ice. And everybody involved in making this happen, because it took a demonstrated commitment on their behalf to work through all of this COVID protocol. I don't know the numbers. I've heard tell that it was extraordinarily expensive to even commit to the amount of testing required for the union to be able to put this on stage. And without that, it would have never happened. So if y'all are watching, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Just thank you. And we have another question actually that is talking about, how COVID impacted this process. How did COVID restrictions, affect the rehearsal process themselves? Or itself?
Yeah, I mean, everyone was masked. We had temperature check-ins every single day, 3 times a week testing. It was actually, we did really well. There was some rehearsals where certain people were on Zoom pretty much the entire time, like, oh, I was exposed. Okay, I have to be away. And we had a little iPad on a stand, and it was like, oh, that's a person. Trying to watch a rehearsal room through a Zoom, like a teeny little iPad mic, was quite something. But then spring break happened, and we actually had some positives come back from spring break. And so there was a point during tech rehearsals where I think I had 8 actors out. I mean, out of 29. It was never in my career have I experienced that. And what was amazing, like, the understudies would just hop on and do the stuff. Like, we didn't even have to ask. They just were covering. And then this person's like, oh yeah, I'm not an understudy, but I can cover that move. And then they would just do it. And to me, that speaks to the incredible resilience of our cast and crew. At one point, we were down to 1 assistant stage manager, and I don't know if you saw all the stuff happening, but like, that was a lot. It was just an extraordinary moment of coming together in the face of adversity to put it up. For sure,
it was terrifying musically too, because we had a positive in the orchestra. We had people in and out with testing. If you didn't get the test results back in time, you couldn't be in the room. And I couldn't go to someone and say, this person needs to be in this rehearsal. And they couldn't. It was so frustrating that, but we just moved on, because for me, we have a seated orchestra, we have actor musicians, and we have a cast. And I don't think until Thursday night, when we did our first preview, that I truly heard all of the elements together at the same time. So the way it gelled and came together is really remarkable. Pandemic theater.
It's something else, that's for sure. So as we're winding down on time, unfortunately, like I said, I could talk with you all for hours on this, but I won't put you all or the viewers through that. So our last kind of 2 questions here. Having Dave Malloy, who created this work, be an alum of Ohio University, how did that impact the process, if at all? Were you all able, Marilyn, as well as you, were you able to talk with Dave about the adaptation, about what his intentions and meanings of some of, the dialogue and the music was versus what you were putting up on stage? How did, if he, play a part in this?
Well, I can answer that Dave is a friend who helped a friend of the school and a friend of many people, including Brent and Stephen Lefew, our associate director of the School of Theater, is on a board with him at a theater that they run in New York City. So there's connections there, and Dave has been a supporter in helping us to get the rights. And what was interesting, I guess, about this process is he first wrote this. It first premiered, I think, in 2012, right? Mm-hmm. So this is an older show for him, and while I'm sure there could be a lot of questions about why he did certain things. What's amazing to be doing a musical with a live writer at this time is that, like, there's a whole coffee table book of annotations that he wrote. There's a genius.com of annotations to all the lyrics. There's countless YouTube videos, which you better believe I've watched all of them, in terms of interviews and conversations and things like that. And at some point, we have to put that work into the world as creators for someone else to interpret. And so we had a lot of information, but I didn't bother Dave about it. He's coming to see the show tomorrow, and then we're going to do a talk, and I hope he likes it. And I hope he likes what we did different, and and also hope that he feels that it serves his vision. But part of the job of doing this anew is to bring our own things to it. So instead, we looked in the score, We looked at everything that he put down, and then we looked at the book. One of the things that was really cool about the table work process, which usually in a play or a musical, you read what's on the page and then you talk about it and you talk through it. We read Tolstoy. So I made a PDF of there's 70 pages, and then there's some flashback things, and then there's some other things that I've sort of added into the physical production as Easter eggs of the show. So War and Peace lovers will all of a sudden realize, oh my gosh, that's Nikolai Rostov. Even though he's not a character in this, he's a character in my version of the show and stuff like that. But we read the Tolstoy. And what was amazing about that is that it was so funny to see, he grabbed a lyric from this phrase, but this is actually the stuff that he didn't say explicitly, but is going on subtextually in the characters. And I think that process made us really faithful to Tolstoy's story and Dave's story together. And it was unique, and it just felt right. And I'm glad we did it that way.
Thank you. Yeah, Marilyn, Brent, anything to add to that?
No, it was so gratifying to put our own stamp on this work, because as Alan said, the work was done. Look at it. There's no shortage of reference material for this. So some of my colleagues from the original production were very helpful. We sourced accordions from them, and were very, very supportive along the way. But I'm proud that we really did this and made it our own through the whole process. It stands alone, and it's great. There's 2 more chances. Come see it.
Yeah.
Marilyn?
Well, I loved hearing how the play was put together, and that return to the novel, and those taking little parts from other places to make it richer, and it's always text and context, and for me, the war that's going on in Ukraine is so important to our reading and our experiencing of this play. We've got COVID, but we've also got Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got the whole idea of what makes humans tick. And the richness of Pierre's relationship to Helene is really important. And one can I guess one can do it in many ways, through the music, but also to go back to the novel, to look at character development and how that is both covert and overt. What is said and what's not said, what's done and what's not done. And I thought the production was amazing and vital, as is the book, or the versions of the book. So thank you for letting me be part of this, and thank you for producing this great musical. Thank you.
And then just kind of for a final thought, for our viewers, if those who, have tickets, and I'm not even sure if the next 2 nights have any more left, but if there are, tickets available, I highly encourage everyone to go get them and see this production. But for those who are, have not seen it yet, this production, or, in the future may go see future different companies' productions of this, what is one thing you hope an audience member can take away from the show or this production in particular?
I think the power of redemption of people when they make mistakes is a really important thing that we've lost a lot of in our society. We are quick to judge when someone makes a faux pas. We are quick to judge when a young person follows their impulses. We're quick to judge when we realize that our life is not where we want it to be, and are judged when we try to make changes. But I think what Tolstoy and what Dave have constantly been doing is reinventing their voices, reinventing their lives, reinventing what it means to be a good person, what it means to be a good citizen of a community. And I think that is ultimately what is celebrated, both in our production and in Great Comet as a show.
Yeah, Marilyn, Brent, go ahead. If you have any comments.
That's well put. I'll add connection to that. Coming out of 2 years of isolation, just to be able to experience something where our faces are in full view and watch these characters who are yearning for a connection. Piere is an intellectual. He's always yearning to connect one way or the other and understand the universe. So how can we use this as a catalyst to move back toward that, hopefully? So but I can't add to Alan. That was very well put.
Mm-hmm. Marilyn, anything to add?
Yes, I'll be the devil here. Anxiety and ambiguity. That there's always a great comet that lets you know that everything you've done is wrong. There's always that self-doubt. And you conquer it and it returns. And I think for Tolstoy, the rejection of War and Peace, the rejection of his way of life, this constant search for simplicity when he was anything but simple. Mm-hmm. It's that ambivalence is the heart of all of the dance and all of the music. And perhaps the universe, that it comes together and then it explodes and there's a reformation that doesn't last. So there's your postmodern take on the misery of it all.
I love that. Well, unfortunately, we are at our time. Like I said, I wish I could talk even longer with all of you, but I think we've had such a great discussion and conversation today. And I just want to, thank the three of you from the bottom of my heart for taking your time out to talk about this, really great production work, the adaptation itself. And, I really encourage everyone who's not gotten a chance to see this production tonight and tomorrow at 8 p.m., right, in the Forum Theater in the RTV building on Ohio University's campus. And again, I want to thank the three of you. Thank you, Tantrum Theater, and everyone who's just been a part of this production to make it possible. Thank you so, so much again for this. And I break legs tonight and tomorrow as well.
Thanks very much, Samantha.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good weekend.